Hello and welcome to another D&D Stories. I am your host, TheWriter. This is a show where I sit here and regale you with all the tabletop gaming stories and remember when something cool happened. So we return once more to Of the Mountain, and we have recovered one of the 5 sacred relics of the capital city of Anvil. And now, at the time, we were sort of doing this on a Discord server with, headphones and people rolling dice on their own desks, because I live nowhere near these people. So we would play a game every 2 weeks, and between games, I actually had players that were active enough to role play, to go places through Anvil and talk to people and talk to each other and kind of converse and give conjecture about what they thought was going on, etc., etc. Talk about the looming army of, 250,000 guys that are coming to Anvil and the stresses that go along with that. So, after the first game, but before we met again, I started passing out things to each individual player so that they could react to that in character and it would kind of build the world around them. So I gave them mail, I gave them messages. I think, who was it? Taryn, our fighter, got a newspaper subscription so he could kind of put his ear to the ground as far as the heartbeat of Anvil and stuff like that. And some kind of strange things started happening. Because as soon as they arrived back from the initial dungeon that held the Staff of the Harvest, they found that they could not get back into contact with Milo Beetlebeard because he was not at home. Dwarf Pope was not in his office. He was not in the Golden Circle. Well, where did he go? And Taryn holds up the newspaper, and it turns out the old folks' home where Jacob Silvercrest was suffered a massive sudden death toll that a virus, a sickness, a disease known as heart rot had struck the entire campus. And that's... I worked for a year at an old folks' home, so if one person gets sick, everybody fucking panics, let me tell you. And when I worked there, deaths would happen in threes, so if you can imagine, just about everybody in Jacob Silvercrest's old folks' home where he lived is dead from this disease called heart rot. And it was nasty, it was sudden, because they were only gone for like 2 or 3 days in this dungeon. So from when they met him, or maybe a little bit before, up until they got back and read this in the newspaper, so it could have been in as little as 36 hours, all these senior citizens of Anvil succumbed to this disease and they were gone. They were dead. Their bodies had these big, like, gaping holes in them of, like, rotted flesh. Like, this thing would just take hold of the muscles around your heart and decay them as though you were already dead and leave this giant fucking hole in your chest. There were no survivors. So the place is quarantined. It's covered with freaking caution tape. They're throwing gasoline and crap on it to burn out the virus. Because if something can clean sweep senior citizens, what do you think it's going to happen to the children or somebody who's already sick, or if it gets into the water supply? So they're burning this place up to get rid of this before it spreads anywhere else, because it popped up, it killed everyone, and then it was gone just as fast. None of the nurses, none of the doctors, none of the caregivers caught this. It was just the more vulnerable, 280, 290-year-old dwarves that were kind of on death's door anyway, but what a way to go. It was awful. And Taryn's reading about this, and he's scratching his head. He's like, God, we were there like 2 or 3 days ago. Poor Jacob. He's gone. I mean, I'm glad we got to him just in time to learn that information about where the Staff of the Harvest was kept. And we go, well, where are all these bodies being kept? I mean, if there were like 50, 60, 80 senior citizens in this place, they go, well, Milo Beetlebeard is performing the folks that they asked, so I guess the town guard or whatever. Milo Beetlebeard, Dwarf Pope, is performing final rites over all the bodies, one after another. So they go to see him at this basically morgue, or a converted morgue, because it's way too many freaking bodies. And they put on the masks and everything, and they go in to talk with him. And he goes, yes, this disease is strange to me, but it's not unheard of that if something strikes an elderly dwarf, that it might spread to others around them. So this was just an extraordinarily bad luck for what had happened. And, he's leaning over them with holy water. He's making all the hand signs and stuff like that. He's got like his holy staff there and his squire who's writing down names and what family they belong to and where they're going to be buried. He's got a lot of work to do, as Dwarf Pope, because this is a major tragedy. It's on the front of the newspaper. Everybody knows about it. So, Dwarf Pope Milo Beetlebeard has to step in, assure everybody it's not a plague. This was just a very unfortunate circumstance. And our heroes kind of gather up and they go, well, Milo, we got the Staff of the Harvest. And he goes, great, you should use that as soon as you can. And, go out beyond the mountain of Anvil and, go out into the fields and, shake it over the crops, make them grow. And we will be able to make an extra harvest and an extra plant while you're going after the next one. The only thing is, somehow that got lost in all the clerical stuff that the players were doing between sessions, so they didn't actually go do it right then. But they still had like 28, 29 days at bare minimum. Again, it's somewhere between like 31 days and 45 days when this army's going to arrive. But, it would take a whole day just to go out there over every single farm field around the capital and shake it, and then, a day to come all the way back. So time is money, but time is also food. But they didn't actually go out and do it right away. They wanted to gather up the relics one after another and then make use of them. So that's also a way you can do it. So meanwhile, in the background, I was not able to share this with everybody, but meanwhile, in the background, Adrian, our human rogue, who has his ear kind of to the ground as far as the nasty underbelly of Anvil, because every big kingdom has one. There's a rough part of town where, people don't like the color of your shoes, so they kick your ass and stuff like that. It's called Lowtown. And Adrian has plenty of contacts in Lowtown as far as getting jewelry boxes open or handing off, hot materials that he can't bring into the regular part of the marketplace, or buying certain things that you not ought to be buying, like poison, chloroform, explosives, etc., etc. But he doesn't want his party to know about this. As far as they know, he's a safecracker, or like Cryptbreaker James. One of the characters that I used to play as. He was a rogue, but he wasn't a thief. He was just good with locks and good with like devices and things like that. He wasn't, a thief or an assassin or anything. He just had a rogue's character class. Much the same way that you could be, a street side magician. You're actually a wizard, but you're an entertainer. You might have some levels in Bard to back that up. Anyway. Adrian does, however, fit the standard definition of a rogue, and he's got his ear to the ground in Lowtown, and it's not sounding very good lately because a lot of prostitutes are going missing, like a noticeable number of them, like at least 50. I mean, if you remember like the story of Jack the Ripper, he specifically goes after women of the night, and it was just this string of fucking grisly murders. And Adrian hears about this because prostitution is legal in Anvil, but it's registered and it's taxed and all that good stuff. If the government ever lost their minds here in modern day and legalized prostitution, you could tax the fuck out of it, no different than the lottery. but that's another conversation to have elsewhere. Adrian hears that all these prostitutes are going missing, being found dead in dumpsters and alleyways, in dingy hotel rooms, like 50, 60, 80 of them, like all within the span of like less than a week. And they think there might be like a serial killer or a new street gang, something else is on the loose. But like this mass death of a particular type of person strikes Adrian as very strange, but he doesn't want to reveal to his party that he has contacts in Lowtown because that'll draw some suspicion to himself, not particularly as a mercenary, but as a less cleanly sort that they wouldn't be able to trust. So what Adrian decides to do is write a note in like big loopy, like girly handwriting so it won't be traced back to him about this, and slip it under Taryn's door. And, he doesn't sign it. It's just like, this is something that's happening in Lowtown, thought you ought to know, and hands it off. And, they can't do fingerprints, they can't look into the past, they don't have magic for that. So Taryn receives an anonymous note from his own party member that all these prostitutes are dropping dead, because it's kind of a point of interest that all these old folks just died, and all these prostitutes just died all at once, and it's very strange to see. It's almost like a serial killer. They'll have an MO, like they only go after women, or they only go after black people, or they only go after rich white guys. It's like a bunch of elderly people just died, and a bunch of prostitutes just died, and two don't generally make a pattern, but that is very strange that both of these mass deaths happened in a couple of days. And they start scratching their chins and thinking, well, Jacob Silvercrest knew about where the first relic was kept. I hope we don't have like a rival party following us around, and if they learned what they wanted from Jacob and then like poisoned him or dropped a disease into like the banana pudding that they serve all the senior citizens, and everybody instantly dropped dead. It's a little too convenient that these two mass deaths happened all at the same time. So Tannen, who is wielding the Staff of the Harvest, is able to enjoy an extra 1d6 spell damage and an extra 1d6 healing, depending on what sort of spell he is casting. But Tannen is mostly a utility wizard, so he didn't take Fireball, he didn't take Shocking Grasp or Burning Hands or anything, no Lightning Bolt. He was a pretty hardcore, like, utility wizard. But anything that he had would be instantly, like, super-powered as far as him wielding the Staff of the Harvest, because it's a sacred dwarven relic. They're like, okay, we need to go after the next relic. Once Milo is done performing rites and stuff, we should tell him about these mass deaths and see if there's any connection, see if there's anything that we can do about this. And they go to Milo, and they tell him all this, and he's like, well, one or two doesn't generally make a pattern, but that is very strange. So I will, being Dwarf Pope, I will tell my paladins, and they will tell the town guard, and we'll be a little more on guard lately. We'll start doing a few more detect evil sweeps, a few more eradicate disease sweeps at like the local homeless shelters and things like that, because if somebody is poisoning the elderly and stabbing prostitutes, it can't be just one person. It has to be like a group of people. So if this group is out there, and if they start displaying a pattern, we will find them. But again, 2 points of data don't usually make a pattern. So as much as I hate to say it, we may have to wait, if they're out there, for them to strike again. And they're like, yeah, you're right. We really can't like graph any kind of territory or any kind of pattern or MO with only two strikes to this. So they will have to wait until a third group of people is either attacked or struck down. But with the paladins and the guards of Anvil on high alert. Hopefully it will not happen anytime soon. So, the next relic that they were to chase down was known as the Hammer of Moradin. Now, if you know your god stats from deities and demigods, Moradin wields an axe of annihilation. But the two kind of like racial weapons that go with dwarves is war hammers and war axes. So a hammer of Moradin, a great weapon for a king, a hammer. It can build and destroy. The Hammer of Moradin was a sacred artifact that not only was a fantastic warhammer, because it did tons and tons of damage that regular warhammers did not do, so that was wonderful to carry around, but anything you struck with it, say a pile of rubble or a broken road or something like that, it would form into a 10 by 10 like 1 foot thick region of brick, like brick and mortar, and like brick and cement or brick and mortar. So it was almost like a Minecraft tool. You could walk up and hit like a bowed wall or a stabbed wall, and it would instantly repair itself, and it would turn into brand new brick and mortar. So if you found like a hole in the ground, oh, people are going to fall into that hole, and you hit the side of it, well, suddenly the hole is covered, and there's a platform of 10 by 10 feet of brick and mortar on the ground. So, like, if they could get a hold of that hammer, making new houses and new dwellings, new barracks, etc., for the 250,000 guys that are coming home, they could do that in a matter of days. Because, whomsoever wields the hammer, he's like, okay, new house, bang, 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 okay. There's a 10 by 10 dwelling. That'll hold, between 2 and 4 people, because they're dwarves and they're smaller. At least to have them have a place in out of the rain off the street. New barracks, okay, boom, 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 boom. 10 minutes, done. Here's a gigantic room with 30 beds that you can put in it, etc., etc. So it doesn't create material, but like if you've got a pile of rubble, it will transmute that material into like a perfect wall, a perfect floor, perfect ceiling. And yeah, there'll be ugly buildings because they'll just be like boxes made of brick, and you'd have to like knock windows out or knock doors out, or if you're going to put a fireplace in, you're going to have to make the chimney, etc., etc. But to make the basic shapes of buildings instantly would be invaluable to taking in all these refugees and injured and soldiers that are coming in to Anvil when they arrive. So they need the Hammer of Moradin to make sure that everybody has a place to stay. So they go, okay, where is this place? Of course, much like the Staff of the Harvest, this place is hidden. And it is beneath a cathedral of Moradin. Now, if you remember, Arntor, I believe, he was a cleric of Sylvanas. So he's a little iffy about going into another god's, like, hidden temple area. But Milo Beetlebeard, Dwarf Pope, tells them that this place was sealed, X number of decades ago when they placed the Hammer of Moradin in it. It used to be a place, a rite of passage, where if you were a cleric or a paladin, you could go there, and through a series of trials, you could speak to Moradin. And they stare at him and they go, really? And they go, yeah, you could go and talk to God, the god of the dwarves. And he wouldn't be, I understand, Arntor, that you follow Sylvanas, but, Moradin is the god of dwarves. He loves all of his children. Just because you're not specifically devoted to him, you understand that he is real and his power is divine, etc. And Arntor's like, yeah, he's not my main god, but I understand. It's like a pantheon. Like I said, the Golden Circle was Sylvanas and Moradin and Bakab and Pelor and like a bunch of gods that kind of got along and didn't hate each other for having followers or whatever. So going into this place, Arntor, will not harm you or rob you of your powers or anything like that, but it is, by design, a place that was for Moradin worshippers, and it is beneath the cathedral, or it was. We sealed it off when we placed the Hammer of Moradin there to keep it safe from would-be marauders should dwarves lose the 100-year war. And we did not, so now comes the time for you lot to go and get it. Now, you will no doubt have to take the trials. And they go, well, what kind of trials are ahead of us? He said, the trials are ones of purification from distraction, because if you are distracted, you do not deserve to talk to Moradin or interact with him. So they go, really? And he goes, I cannot tell you of the trials. I never went there myself. I became Dwarf Pope, and, the powers divine, the powers that be, were already within me to speak with Moradin. I was once a mighty paladin. I'm getting up there in ages, so I don't really go into battle and smite evil anymore. But as Dwarf Pope, I can have the capacity to do what this location was built to do. So it's almost like a megaphone or a telephone or whatever you want to call it out of medieval context. It's basically a telephone to talk to God, but to dial the number, you need to take all these trials. So they unseal this place. Milo goes back to doing his rites for the dead, and his squires writing all this stuff out and making sure that they are all accounted for, and the remains will probably be burned to prevent any kind of disease from spreading, etc., etc. And they go down into this place, the four of them, Terran, Tannen, Arntor, and Adrian. And the first dungeon that they went into was me kind of flexing my randomly generated dungeon muscles. And this dungeon was more along the lines of, this was a location, it had a function, it's laid out accordingly. So I preach and I preach and I preach to everybody that I can. If you're going to build a dungeon, make sure it's a place. Like if you make a castle, there needs to be a mess hall, a kitchen, a pantry, tons of bedrooms. All these places served as functional before they became ruins, before they got destroyed, before goblins rushed in and killed everybody and took it over as their stronghold. Whatever it happened to be, they need to make sense. So while the first dungeon was specifically built to be a death trap, this second one was built to be like a pilgrimage location. Like you could go in there, take these trials, and talk to God. It was a very interesting place to be while it was functional. But now that it's been sealed away to protect the Hammer of Moradin, they haven't gone down there in a while, and goodness knows what skitters in the dark. So be careful, adventurers, because shit's about to get real. So they all go down there, and they are immediately set upon by previous occupants, ghosts, different insects, things that kind of like burrowed in from the depths of the earth. But if you, I guess if you think about it, you'd find like angry dwarven ghosts in places like this, because they had to have like priestesses, they had to have people that maybe failed the trials and didn't actually make it out alive, or different guardians that you cannot go through the final door without taking the trials. Oh, I'll take you on anyway. Squish. Stuff like that. It is inhabited, but only very sparsely. This dungeon wasn't really meant to have a lot of combat. And I know some players get itchy if they don't have at least 3 fights every time they sit down to play D&D or whatever it happens to be. But this was more of a purification ritual kind of place. Because if you're going to speak to Moradin, you need to be without any kind of ulterior motive or mortal distraction. Now, what is a mortal distraction? A mortal distraction is anything that your human body or dwarven body needs that would err upon your judgment if it got to be too powerful. Things like hunger, exhaustion, excretion, lust, filth, curiosity, things that would keep you from like meditating deeply if you were a monk. Human like physical needs. And they go, well, that doesn't sound too bad. So of course, They go into a place. There's some changing rooms. They've got like a pool area. They've got a place where they can wash their feet. Take the sandals from your feet, because the place upon which you stand is holy ground, and all that good stuff. So they wash their feet, and they find just these little sectional areas. It's not really like a dungeon, but if they're gonna step through the final doorway or beyond the final guardian, they find the guardian right away. I put up like a big stone golem, and their like challenge rating is like 10 or 12, 13, something like that. They're not to be screwed with, especially if you're not carrying any blunt weapons, which I don't think any of them were except for Arntor, because he's the only dwarf in the party, so he's got his own warhammer. They weren't going to take him on, so the Guardian would move aside only if it recognized the fact that you had completed all these different tasks and trials. So they go through pretty much each one. And I had like a little chart with a checklist next to me. I was like, Terran, Tannen, Arntor, and Adrian. And then I had each one of the 6 trials. And during the session, I was like, check mark, check mark, check mark. Oh, they didn't do that yet because the Guardian's not going to move, etc., etc. So they come to realize it's almost like not really a spa, but kind of. Like they've got a bathing area with hot water to get rid of any impurities on their skin. There's an old like feasting hall with a great big mantle and tons of tables and chairs. Some of them are tumped over. There's spider webs everywhere. They start knocking down spider webs and stuff. And they share a meal there. It turns out, I think it was Terran, who was actually quite a good cook, to use the mantle, the fireplace, to cook up what food they had, to share a meal there. Like I said, there was basically a hot springs area. There was a whole room devoted to like going to the bathroom, which is just like, here's 9 or 10 toilet stalls, and it's like, oh, there's a whole room in this dungeon devoted to taking a shit, and that kind of stuff. And they even came across a library, which was actually pretty interesting because they found a gold leaf holy book. They found some scrolls that would cast the light spell. They found like a silver necklace, some empty lockets. They found like bits and pieces of, people left this place pretty expeditiously. Like, we're going to hide the Hammer of Moradin here, everybody out, and stuff like that. They also found a Book of One Question, which is a magic item that I believe I made up, but I refuse to believe nobody else hasn't thought of this. A Book of One Question is basically, it's just what it sounds like. You ask a question, you open it, and inscribed on the pages within is the answer to your question, and then the book turns to ash. Now, there are divination spells that do that. There's holy spells where you can ask your god a yes or no question, etc., etc. And I just put that into a book. So if they were ever confused or lost or needed to know something and I didn't have a way to convey it to them, they would have this Book of One Question to figure out where to go from there. And it wasn't like a genie where they would just try to like screw you out of whatever you wanted. It would be like a legitimate answer to your question, up to the length of this book to explain it to you. So however complicated, however simple, this book is blank until you speak the command word, ask a question, and then open it. So it's very interesting. They did have limits because, like they can't predict the future. Like if you ask the Book of One Question, oh, who am I going to marry when I grow up? And then it tells you the woman's name. No, it can't do that. It can read the past really well, like who won the battle of blah, 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 and how many soldiers were there left, and it would know that. But the future is not yet written, so it cannot be written in this book either. So they go on, they find a supply room, they eat, they take a dump, they scrub themselves. Then they come across a, I don't want to say bordello or brothel, but kind of. built into the side of this place that hosts a number of, I suppose sylph would be the right word, silver women, or otherworldly half-angels, if you will. All of them dwarven, in shape at least, sporting wings and the silvery glow about their heads. And they are all there. They detected our adventurers when they came into the dungeon itself, that, lust is one of the things that can distract you from Moradin Divine. Come, be with us for the evening, and you will be pure of such distraction. And, far be it from me to ever deny my players the ability to get laid or to have fan service, so you can imagine that whole thing going on. And, of course, they take turns, because there's beds. There's several sets of beds, and there's like 6 or 8 of these women, and a couple of guys as well. But they've only been adventuring together for a rather short time, so they kind of hang out in the dining hall and send in one person after the next. Taran, our fighter, is a little uncomfortable with this because he has kind of a boo in his backstory. He's got a half-orc woman that he was in a mercenary group with. He doesn't know if she's even alive out there somewhere. So he's not crazy about going to bed with these interdimensional angel women, but his blood is as red as any other man's. So he goes and he does his thing for a while. And then Tannen, of course, who is our skinny, Navi-kneed wizard friend. And then Arntor, and then Adrian is last, and Adrian rolls like a 30. And I usually do like, oh, whatever, we'll fade to black, but whatever check you think would be funny, like a ride check, or an acrobatics check, or a grapple check, to see how that goes. Adrian throws it down, and it's like a natural 20 plus 10 on his acrobatics, because he's a rogue. And, I tell Taran, I was like, Taran, you can hear like a woman shrieking 3 rooms over while Adrian is in there with the sylph or the angel women, and he's like, oh my god, and the headphones go on, and I was like, no, there's no headphones. He's like, I stir the pot of stew I'm making extra loud because I don't want to listen to this. And so that's about the maturity level that's going on here. They all get laid so that they are not thinking of such things when they go to speak with Moradin himself. And finally, all the trials are done. There's 5 or 6 of them. Again, what was it? Hunger, filth, lust, excretion, curiosity, and I think that was all of them. I've got the dungeon map in front of me, but my notes are not the best. But the Stone Guardian finally steps aside, having completed my checklist behind the DM screen, and they step up into this black and white tiled hallway, and they go beyond these golden doors that they have proven themselves to be without distraction, that they may be respectful and pure, etc., in the eyes of Moradin to be in his presence. Now, what they realized when they got there was that they were not actually going to talk with God in the literal sense, but there was a shrine there. It was one of the first shrines of Moradin in Anvil. It has a big golden statue of a dwarf, with a crown upon his head, sitting on a throne, looking very like Zeus-like and stuff like that. He's adorned with gems, and his eyes are gigantic, bright rubies, and there's torches that light up when they come in that illuminate the statue in silver and gold, and it's shining and bright. And, the tradition was you would go up the stairs atop the dais, kneel down, bow, say your prayer, if you were a paladin or a cleric or whatever happened to be. You would say your prayer, speak with Moradin, and, if you were a paladin, your powers would manifest then, or if you were a cleric, your ability to heal others with magic would manifest then. It would be like the completion of your training. would be to come before this statue of Moradin and speak with him, and if he judged you worthy and without distraction, you would be endowed with holy power for the rest of your life. So it's a very important room. And I tell them, there's some stairs and a dais, and there is a place for like a small 6-inch tall pedestal, and upon the pedestal is an ornate silver and gold hammer. And they all look at each other like, is this going to like Indiana Jones on us? Is it going to jump to life and attack us? Because this statue would be like 40, 50 feet tall if it got up and decided to crush them. I mean, gold is a soft metal, but it's still a metal. It would hurt a lot. And Arntor kind of looks around like, this place doesn't really strike me. There were no traps here. The ghosts and guardians and what few vermin we came across were circumstantial at best. This place was not built to hurt people. I am not afraid. And he wanders forward, being the only dwarf in the party, and a cleric to boot. Wanders up onto this thing, and he can feel the holy presence of Moradin about him, though he be a cleric of Sylvanas. And he reaches down and he lifts the Hammer of Moradin, and it's like, ah! And of course, it's got on the side, he who be worthy of this hammer wield all the creative power of Moradin. He's like, is this like Thor's hammer? Shut up. And he's like, the Hammer of Moradin is like it's obnoxious. It's like a 3d8 plus 1 weapon. It's got the silver quality. It's got the ability to make brick walls by striking a surface, etc., etc., to build or instantly repair anything about them. And I was like, you guys got it. You got the Hammer of Moradin, the second relic of the 5. And they're like, wow, that's awesome. That wasn't so bad compared to the first one. Because again, the first dungeon was a fucking death trap, and they broke the relic into pieces and shit like that. And this one was far more pleasant than the first one around, so they were pleasantly surprised to find that it wasn't like a menagerie of terrible stone statues and gargoyles and other bullshit. This was a sacred place. And the only monsters they ran into were like pretty circumstantial. So they turn about to leave. The Stone Guardian moves back into place to wait for the next set of people that would attempt these purification trials. And they weren't very hard trials, but it was a rite of passage more than anything. So they go out of this sacred place and back out into the Golden Circle, and they meet with Milo Beetlebeard, and they're like, here, try it. This bit of the road is broken. Try it. And Arntor. There's 2 T's and 2 A's. It's very hard to keep track of them. Arntor, our dwarven cleric, swings the Hammer of Moradin only lightly, and the road repairs itself, and in a 10 by 10 radius becomes brick. And he's like, wow, this would be the potential to build buildings or houses with this thing is amazing. I could do that in like an afternoon. And Milo's like, you're right. Why don't you guys take some time off while I gather up what information I can about the 3rd relic, and we will send you on your way as soon as we can. Remember, we are on a time limit here, so I have much to do, being Dwarf Pope, and you should probably all rest up in the meantime. So he sent them on their merry back to the tavern or hotel or whatever where they were staying. And that was kind of where we left off there, but as kind of a stinger at the end of that session, I go, Taryn, the local paper boy brings you your paper, and they were down in this dungeon again for a couple of days. And they go, the local paper boy brings you your paper because he paid like 30 gold to just get the paper every day. That was just something that he wanted. Taryn picks up the newspaper, and he opens it up. They're sitting at dinner that night, And the one of the headlines says that Anvil is enjoying sudden economic. How do I want to put this? It must be enjoying a sudden economic boom because the homeless population has plummeted in the past 3 or 4 months. And Taryn kind of looks up and he goes, the homeless population? And they kind of look at each other, well, yeah, Anvil's kind of a full city. That's why we're gathering all these relics to make room for 250,000 more. And he goes, the homeless population has disappeared. It's just plummeting. It's almost gone. And they look at each other and they go, wait a minute. All those elderly people died from a disease, and then all those prostitutes got assassinated, and now all the homeless people in Anvil are just gone. They went somewhere. They're missing. They disappeared. The paper is writing it off as a good thing because they count fewer homeless people at the local soup kitchen, but based on what they know, chances are they didn't exactly rise out of their poverty. So they look at each other and they go, elderly people, prostitutes on the lower end of town, and homeless. And they go, I wonder if whoever this is that they're suspecting already is trying to, like, get rid of people that are, like, either useless to society or who aren't contributing, or, like, they're trimming the fat, so to speak, out of Anvil, but, like, en masse. Because, like, if 50, 60, 80 elderly people go missing or die of a disease, well, suddenly that old folks home has room for 80 people. You know, if all the homeless people are gone, suddenly that soup kitchen has soup for all the people arriving in town. And if all those prostitutes are gone, well, there goes the chance for any of those returning soldiers to get any kind of diseases or have a reason to be hanging out in the bad part of the city. There's either an evil party, an evil entity, something is wandering around Anvil, categorizing people, and then if they don't contribute to society or otherwise are deemed useless, is killing them en masse. It's like, there could be like an evil party out there, or an evil cult or something. This is clearly orchestrated. What are we going to do about this? And that is where they left off for that particular like session. And like I said, there was a lot of RP that went on between games. We'll get to that next time. So I hope you enjoyed that story, and I will see you guys on the next D&D Stories. Keep gaming.
Hi guys, T here. Remember to hit that like button for me on your way out. If you'd like to see artwork and maps from my gaming table, check out the D&D Stories Facebook page. Also, I have a Patreon if you'd like to toss a few gold pieces into your humble bard's hat. Links in the description below. Keep gaming!